Hello, hello. Welcome to How to Grow My Small Business. I'm Lindsay Fletcher. I teach women in local small business how to grow their network, market their business to attract the right leads, and close sales without feeling pushy or salesy, without working more, and without posting more. I hope you've had a great week. I'm excited today because I have a couple of big announcements for you in today's episode. First, this one's kind of exciting. The podcast is now on YouTube in video form. And I'm excited to share this podcast with that part of the world. So if YouTube is your thing, I'd love to connect over there. My channel is called Small Business Growth Tools with Lindsay Fletcher, and you can subscribe over there as well. I'll be posting the video version of this podcast over on YouTube. If this is your first time seeing this podcast and you're on YouTube, hello, welcome to the fam. And that brings me to my next big announcement. Next week on the audio versions of this podcast, you will see a little bit of a rebrand of this podcast. We're changing from How to Grow My Small Business to Small Business Growth Tools. And I'll be honing in on sharing tips, tricks, and strategies for small businesses, specifically for local small businesses. Now, don't panic if that's not you, because I'm not changing the topics, and faith will definitely still be a major part of this podcast. Nothing is changing content-wise. We're just growing up a little bit, and I'm really excited about this shift. So let's dive into today's topic, because this is something that I have been kind of mulling over, and I was listening to this podcast recently, and the host of the podcast was talking about Joshua and Caleb, how they were two of the 12 leaders that actually made it to the promised land. Now, that if you do the math really quickly, that is a little over 16% of the leaders, okay? So two of the 12 leaders, Joshua and Caleb, actually made it, and the rest didn't make it. And it wasn't because they weren't capable of making it to the promised land, right? They failed and they weren't allowed to enter the promised land because of what they believed and what they spoke. So today we're talking about how the words that we speak, how the words that you speak out loud, or either out loud or in your head, might be the very thing keeping you from the growth, impact, and revenue in your small business that you've been praying for. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how mindset and speech stalled an entire nation, and only 16% of their leaders made it into the promised land. I'm going to help you identify the phrases that are sabotaging your business, and you're going to learn how to start speaking life over your work, your calling, and your future. So let's talk about the 16% who made it, okay? This is in Numbers 13 through 14. 12 leaders were sent out to scout the land, and all 12 leaders saw the exact same facts. They also had the opportunity to speak in faith, see in faith, and believe in faith, but only two of them spoke with faith and in God's confidence in God's promise. The other 10 leaders spoke in fear and limitation and defeat. So the difference wasn't the circumstances, because they all saw the exact same things, right? It was perspective. Their differences were their perspective, their mindset, their faith, and then what they actually said out loud. Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple of scripture references here. Numbers 13:30 is where Caleb quiets the people down and he speaks faith over them and into them, right? And then Numbers 14:1 through 4 is where you read about the complaining and the fear and the desire to go back to Egypt, back where they were in slavery. And we've talked about the emotional cycle of change, right? How our brains get to the point where we're excited about the change, and then we go into the next stage, which is where we start feeling a negative emotions, and then we hit the valley, and we start thinking that going back to our old way is the better way to go, right? And that's kind of, I think, what was happening probably in their minds here is they had been wandering in the desert or in the wilderness for 40 years at that point. And they think that going back to Egypt and back into slavery will be better than pushing through and making it into the promised land. Okay. And God didn't punish them for feeling afraid, but he responded to what they repeatedly spoke out loud. They repeatedly complained. They repeatedly said things like, "You're going to kill all our children and we're never going to make it and we're going to die out here alone," right? And in Numbers 14:28, God says to the people, "I will do to you the very thing that I heard you say." Okay. So, what I want you to know is that complaining is a growth killer. And the Israelites wandered for 40 years. They complained, and complaining became their default language that they spoke. Their words reinforced fear and limitations. They weren't speaking in faith and what God had already done. They weren't speaking as a believer, right? Now, the parallel for business here are saying things like the market's saturated. People don't want to pay my prices, or I need to lower my prices. My business is slow. I'm bad at sales. This probably won't work anyway, right? I can't afford a coach, or I can't afford that course. My little business. How many times have we all said that? Well, my little business, right? But the Bible clearly tells us that we need to watch our words, right? There's life and death in the power of the tongue, is something that lots of people quote quite regularly. But there's a couple more scriptures that you can look up, right? Philippians 2:14 says, "Do everything without grumbling or arguing." And 1 Corinthians 10:10 says, warning against complaining. Sorry, 1 Corinthians 10:10 is warning against the complaining that Israel was doing, right? Complaining doesn't just express frustration. It trains your brain to expect defeat. Now, I love me some good science. If you've been around my audio podcast for any sort of time, I love some good science, and this is how our brain works. It was designed to keep us safe. It's designed to keep us out of harm's way and comfortable. And it will tell you all the negative things about the promised land, about that dream God's placed in your heart, about that business you're supposed to go after. Your brain will tell you all the negative things about the promised land so that you stay right where you are, because it cannot comprehend why you would take risks and put yourself out there when it's uncomfortable, when it doesn't feel good. So you have to tell your brain to shut up. And yes, I'm telling you to tell your brain to shut up, and really, really focus on the vision that God gave you, or the dream that he put on your heart for your business. Okay. Now, life and death are in the power of the tongue. We've already quoted that scripture, and the Bible's very clear on how we are to speak. As a mom, I am really careful about how I speak over my kids, how I let them speak about themselves. I'm really careful about how I speak over my husband and my family. But I'm sitting here wondering how often I have thwarted business growth, or thwarted or stopped connections from happening because I was speaking out loud that things were hard, or that I can't afford that thing, or even complaining like the Israelites were doing, right? And not remembering all the things that God had already done for me. And the same goes for my personal being, right? About my body, my limitations, what I allow my brain to think about myself or my abilities. Same goes for you. What is that internal monologue happening in your brain that you're saying and thinking and believing, right? So Proverbs 18:21 is life and death are in the power of the tongue. But I want to tell you a couple other scriptures that you can look up. Proverbs 12:18 is Proverbs 12 in general is all about how words can wound or words can heal. That whole chapter is about how we talk and what we talk about. Okay. But James 3:5-6 says the tongue sets the course of life. And I'm going to see if I can find this quickly from in my Bible, because this one kind of smacked me in the face here. Let me see if I can quickly get to James. There it is. All right. I'm going to start with verse 3. We can make a large horse go wherever we want, by means of a small bit in its mouth, and a small rubber makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go. And even though the winds are strong, even in the same way, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches. A tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And among all the parts of the body, the tongue is the flame of fire. It is a whole world of wickedness, corrupting your entire body. It can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself. That one kind of really hit me in the face because our what we say, what comes out of our mouths can light a fire for good, or it can burn the whole thing down, right? And then Matthew 12:34, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? So when we apply this to business, our words really, really matter. Okay. Our words really matter. And your words can shape things like confidence in sales conversations, willingness to take bold action, how others perceive your leadership. Are you showing up and speaking in a way that people want to follow you, right? Your words also can determine whether you persist or quit. You will convince yourself it's not working, but have you really done it consistently, right? Are you saying out loud it's not working? You're making it not work, right? You're basically prophesying over your business every day, whether you realize it or not, okay? So this is where the episode is going to get on the personal side of things, okay? And this is a part I'm especially preaching to the choir here because I've been guilty. I'm sure I am guilty. It's the internal language of I'm 40 something years old. I'm 44 years old, or I'm 54 years old, or I'm 64 years old and I feel behind, or I am behind, right? Or everyone else is doing better than me, or I always mess things up, or I'm not cut out for this, or I can't learn new things, right? But scripture specifically tells us about our internal narratives and to counter them. Romans 12:2 is all about renewing of the mind, right? Where God calls us, God is calling us to renew our mind every single day. And in 2 Corinthians 10:5, he's telling us to take thoughts captive. Take our thoughts captive. When a negative thought comes in, we say, nope, shut up. We're not thinking that way, and we reframe it in a positive manner, right? And then Isaiah 55:8-9 talks about how God's ways are higher and better than ours, right? So what I want you to think about is if a business friend came to you and started speaking negatively about their business, would you let them continue, right? Or would you speak negatively? Would you say something about someone else's business, right? And if you wouldn't say it about someone else's business, you shouldn't be saying it about your own, right? So if you wouldn't say it to a friend, you should not let it live rent free in your mind, okay? So I want to choose to be in the 16%, right? So let's compare and contrast the two groups, okay? The 16%, the two leaders that made it to the promised land, focused on God's promises. The 84% focused on the obstacles. The 16% spoke faith, and they believed in God, and they believed that they were going to be taken care of and that the promises they had been promised would come to fruition. The 84% spoke in fear. The 16% trusted with obedience. The 84% just wanted to go back and be in safety, what they thought was safe, right? The 16% entered the promised land, and the 84% continued to wander. Okay. So there's a big difference in how we speak and how it will impact our small business growth. Okay. The 16% speak possibility before they see proof. They speak faith over their businesses. Okay. They recall the vision or the dream that God gave them. And if that's something, if God has given you a vision of what your business is going to look like, or a vision to move towards, or he's put a dream in your heart, you need to be speaking that over your business as a possibility even before you see it. We're going to take action even when it feels uncomfortable and even when we feel silly, like putting our first YouTube video out there. Hi, that's me on this episode, right? We're going to take action even when it feels uncomfortable. And we're going to start aligning our words with our calling, not our circumstances. Okay. So each episode, I give you a little bit of homework and some reflection and some things to think about and some things to take action on, right? So I want you to reflect on these couple of questions, these 3 questions. What phrases do I repeat when things feel hard? Which words sound like fear instead of faith? And what would change if I spoke life over my business daily? Okay. And then the action that I want you to take this week is I want you to write down 3 phrases that you are going to remove from your vocabulary. 3 phrases you are no longer going to say. Something like my little business. No, no. Your business is making a kingdom impact. So, no, it's not a little business. Okay. Maybe it's something like I can't afford that. Maybe you replace it with I will be able to afford that. Right? And I want you to speak them out loud daily. I want you to go back to your vision. I want you to write that vision down or the dream that God gave you. I want you to write it down and I want you to look at it and read it out loud every day. Okay. And maybe it's time for you to ask God to show you where your words are not aligning with his promises. Look, friends, I am not calling you out here. I'm calling you up. The promised land wasn't reserved for the most talented. It was entered by the ones who trusted God enough to speak life before they saw results. I don't know about you, but I want to be in the 16%. Let's be uncommon and unreasonable with our faith this year and in our small businesses. Okay. All right. That is a wrap on this episode. Thank you so much for being here. If this is your first episode with me, first viewing, I don't know, what do you call them on YouTube? Can you comment that below if you've stuck around this long? I would love to know all the YouTube lingo. So fill me in on all the things. Okay. If this is your first episode with me, welcome to the family. If you would hit subscribe or follow wherever you're listening or watching. And if you have been around for a while, would you share this with someone who could use some encouragement and that you are maybe mentoring or someone in your sphere that you are calling to be in the 16% with you? Let's be in the 16% together. Okay. All right. As always, I'm praying for you and I'm praying for your business, and I will talk to you next week.